The data was perfect. That was the problem. Graf Vel had spent 30 days reviewing every feed, every signal, every thermal scan his observation vessel had pulled from the edge of the human colony system. 30 days of watching humans drill, march, fire, maneuver, and repeat. 30 days of building a model that should have been impossible to build so cleanly. And yet here it was. Perfect. He stood in the dimly lit analysis chamber aboard the Vreth vessel Quiet Eye, surrounded by floating screens that showed human warships running formation exercises in the dark between two moons. The ships moved in tight columns. The same column shape, the same speed variance, the same 14-second gap between lead and trailing vessels every single time. He had timed it across 11 separate drills. 14 seconds. Always 14. He tapped the report closed and turned to face Warlord Shonas, who sat at the far end of the chamber with his arms folded, saying nothing. Shonas was not a patient creature by nature, but he had learned to be still when Graf Vel presented. Results required stillness. Their naval doctrine, Graf Vel said, is built around layered formation discipline. They do not improvise under pressure. They execute predetermined responses. This makes them powerful in a fight they have planned for. It makes them fragile in a fight they have not. He pulled up a map of the human outer colonies. 3 systems, 17 stations, a handful of defensive platforms around the larger worlds. Their ground forces are well trained, but rely heavily on top-down command. A unit at the bottom does not act until a unit at the top tells it to. We have confirmed this across 47 observed exercises. The average response delay between an unexpected event and a coordinated human reply is 6 minutes and 20 seconds. Shonas spoke for the first time. And we can move faster than that. Much faster. Graf Vel gestured to the outer colony marked Harkin Station. We begin here. Their defense posture at Harkin is 2 cruiser wings and a ground garrison. If we arrive before they can relay a response to their inner systems, we cut the communication line and the rest of their colonies react to silence. Silence breeds hesitation. Hesitation breeds delay. Shonas unfolded his arms. 72 hours. That is my recommendation. The warlord stood, looked at the map one more time, and left without another word. The order was given in the corridor outside. Graf Vel heard it relayed across the ship's channel before the chamber door had finished closing behind him. He began packing his equipment. At the far end of the room, half hidden behind a secondary console, a junior analyst named Tail had not moved for the last 4 minutes. He was staring at a single piece of raw footage from day 19 of the observation period. A small human infantry unit running a standard breach drill in an open training yard on the surface of the colony's second moon. They had run the drill 4 times. Tail had watched it 4 times. And each time, the unit had changed something small. Not the objective, not the positions, something in the spacing between soldiers. The angle they used to approach the simulated doorway. The timing of the first entry. It was not a large difference. Most analysts would call it variance, call it imprecision, call it the natural inconsistency of biological soldiers who got tired and adjusted without thinking. Tail did not think that was what he was seeing. He pulled up the footage of a second unit running a different drill on day 23. Watched it 3 times. Then a third unit from day 8. Each one changed something small. Each time. He flagged the footage and crossed the room to where Graf Vel was sealing his case. Senior analyst, Tail said carefully. I found something I want you to look at before we move. Graf Vel did not look up. File it in the secondary report. It may be relevant to the accuracy of the primary model. Now Graf Vel looked up. His expression was not hostile. It was simply tired. Tail, I have 30 days of clean data. The model has a confidence margin of 91%. What could you have found in the last 4 minutes that changes that? Tail hesitated. The human units change their drills slightly every repetition. I do not think it is imprecision. I think it is biological variance, Graf Vel said. It is in section 7 of the report. We accounted for it. He picked up his case. File it in the secondary report. We leave in 6 hours. Tail stood in the empty chamber alone after Graf Vel walked out. He looked at the footage still running on the screen. The human unit completing the drill for the 4th time, the last soldier through the breach pausing for just a moment before moving to cover. He filed it in the secondary report. Then he sat down and watched the footage one more time. 14 hours away, on the human carrier Dawn line, A single alert light came on at a monitoring station. The officer on duty looked at it, noted the position shift of an unregistered vessel near the outer belt, and sent a priority message up the chain. It reached Admiral Riva Ogan in 11 minutes. She read it once, set it down on the table next to her untouched work, looked out the viewport at the stars. Then she called her communications officer. "Get me Commander Storn," she said, "and tell him they took the bait." The silence before a battle was always the worst part. Not for Dale Storn. For him, silence was just another tool. He had learned that early, on a cold mountain range on a planet whose name most people had already forgotten, where his unit had spent 11 days moving quietly through enemy territory before anyone fired a single shot. The enemy had not known they were there until the moment it no longer mattered. He stood now in the operations room of the carrier Dawn Line, 3 decks below the bridge, surrounded by 40 officers who had all been briefed and had all gone quiet. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the Vreth fleet dropping out of warp near Harkin Station in real time. 47 vessels, mostly mid-weight cruisers. A handful of heavy assault carriers at the rear, exactly where the projections said they would be. Dale watched the Vreth fleet take formation. Column shape. The same column shape his team had observed in 41 of the Vreth's own training exercises, captured over 2 years of quiet intelligence work. They liked columns. Columns felt safe to them, structured, controlled, efficient. Columns were predictable. The Harkin defense wing was already moving. 2 cruisers, 1 destroyer, and a screening force of 8 smaller patrol craft. They moved toward the Vreth fleet at a speed that looked aggressive but was carefully calculated to look more aggressive than it was. The patrol craft fired first, short, sharp bursts that tagged 2 Vreth lead ships without doing serious damage. The point was not to do damage. The point was to make the Vreth believe this was the full response. The patrol craft broke formation at the 90-second mark, exactly as planned, scattering outward. The 2 cruisers held for another 40 seconds, long enough to look like they were fighting, short enough not to actually take fire, and then disengaged at full burn, pulling away from the Vreth fleet in a tight arc that curved toward the outer edge of the system. From the outside, it looked like a rout. Tail watched the same feed from the Vreth flagship and immediately pulled up his notes. He marked the timestamp. The human withdrawal had begun at exactly 91 seconds. He ran the clip back and watched the patrol craft scatter again. They had not scattered randomly. Each craft had moved to a specific heading. 5 of them had gone wide, far out from the main engagement. 3 had gone tight, pulling back toward the inner system. All 8 had maintained the same speed within a 3% variance. That was not how frightened units scattered. He opened a channel to Grathvel Station. The human withdrawal pattern confirms our model, Grathvel said. They broke under forward pressure. The defense wing is retreating to protect the inner colony. We advance. The patrol craft went to specific headings. I do not think. They went away from us. That is the relevant fact. The channel closed. Tail stared at the 8 craft vectors on his screen. He pulled up the system map and extended the vectors forward, tracing where each craft would end up if it continued at current heading and speed. He stopped when he saw the result. The 8 craft were not fleeing to the inner colony. They were moving to positions that formed a rough ring around the area the Vreth fleet was now entering. A large ring, far enough out that it would take time to notice. Far enough out that by the time the Vreth fleet reached the center of the system, the ring would be complete. He looked at the map for a long time. Then he looked at the Vreth fleet's position, sitting in the middle of a region of space that the humans had just quietly finished surrounding. He tried to open Grathvel's channel again. It was flagged as busy. He tried show NASA's flag officer. Also busy. The fleet was already accelerating toward the inner system, confident and moving at speed, and no one was answering. In the operations room of the Dawn Line, one of the tracking officers leaned forward and said, "Vreth fleet has passed the outer marker. They are inside the zone." Dale did not respond immediately. He was looking at a secondary screen showing a different part of the system entirely, the trailing edge of the Vreth formation, where 3 Vreth scout ships had been running parallel to the main fleet about 30,000 kilometers out. The scouts were gone now. Not destroyed. Dale's people had not fired on them. They had simply gone quiet and stopped responding to the main fleet signals, which meant something had reached them first. Something small, quiet, and already in position before the battle started. He made a small note in his log. Estimated 3 Vreth scouts neutralized without a shot fired. No debris. No explosion. Just gone. He looked up at the room. 40 officers watching him. Phase 2, he said. They turned back to their screens. Lieutenant Cora Brandt appeared at his shoulder. She had been standing behind him for the last 20 minutes without saying a word, which was one of the things that made her good at her job. Do you think they figured it out yet? She asked quietly. Dale watched the Vreth fleet moving deeper into the zone on the display. One of them has, he said. The question is whether anyone's listening to him. The city of Juris was empty. Not abandoned in panic. Not empty the way a place goes empty when people run. No overturned carts. No dropped belongings. No doors swung open mid-step. Just empty. Clean. Like a building after everyone has clocked out and the lights have been turned off from a central switch. Vreth Ground Commander Ben Voss stood at the edge of what the human maps called a transit hub, a large open structure, roofed in metal, built to move thousands of people in and out of the city center. The benches were clear. The service counters were clean. Someone had even stacked the chairs. He sent 3 scout units into the city on 3 separate routes. They reported the same thing from every direction. Residential blocks, empty. Market districts, empty. Administrative buildings, empty, locked, and in some cases, stripped. Not broken into and stripped, methodically stripped. Equipment removed, cables pulled, data terminals wiped. The kind of empty that took planning. Ben Voss pulled up the timeline. His fleet had entered the system 14 hours ago. His ground forces had landed 6 hours ago. 37,000 humans had been living on Juris according to the colony registry. Every single one of them was gone. 6 hours. 37,000 people. Gone without a trace of panic. He did not have time to decide what that meant before the first column was hit. The explosion came from below, a shaped charge under a road section that folded an armored carrier into the crater it had just created. Before the dust cleared, gunfire opened from 4 buildings simultaneously, aimed at the second and third vehicles in the column, which had stopped to react to the first explosion and had stopped in exactly the positions where the fire was aimed. By the time Ben Voss got a report, the engagement was already over. The fire had stopped. 30 seconds, maybe 40. His forces swept the 4 buildings and found nothing. No soldiers. No equipment. Just 4 open windows on the 3rd floor of each building, pre-positioned to cover the road below, with small metal brackets bolted to the floor indicating where something had been mounted and then removed. The humans had set those brackets before the invasion started, before the Vreth fleet had even entered the system. He moved his armored columns onto wider roads, away from narrow streets. The wider roads led them across a large open area the maps called a freight yard, which was spacious and clear and had excellent sightlines in all directions. His commanders reported feeling more comfortable there. 3 minutes after the last vehicle crossed into the freight yard, the road behind them collapsed into a tunnel that none of his engineers had detected. The vehicles at the rear of each column dropped into concrete-lined passages that ran beneath the yard, and before anyone above could respond, the passages sealed. Not with explosives, with heavy prefabricated doors that locked from the inside. He sent the report up the chain and waited. The response from the fleet took 9 minutes. He was told to hold position and await air support. He held position for 4 minutes before a third of his perimeter units reported contact. Not attack, contact. Small groups of human soldiers appearing at extreme range, firing briefly, and vanishing into underground access routes before anyone could respond. His forces chased them twice and found dead-end passages that had been deliberately routed to waste time. His forces stopped chasing after that. Ben Voss had been in ground combat for 20 years. He had fought 4 species across 6 campaigns. He had never felt, until this moment, like the battlefield itself was not neutral. The ground under his feet had been prepared. Not reacted to. Prepared. Someone had known, before a single Vreth soldier had landed, where they would walk, what routes they would take, and what they would do when things went wrong. In orbit, Grath Vel received Ben Voss's full report and read it 3 times. Then he made a decision he would later understand was the worst of his career. He recommended an orbital strike on the colony's industrial and communications infrastructure. Destroy the coordination network, blind the defenders, force the ground battle into one the humans had not planned for. Shonas approved it in under a minute. The strikes went down. Clean, precise. For large industrial facilities, 2 communications relay towers, and a power distribution hub. All destroyed from orbit in under 8 minutes. Tail watched the strike coordinates update on the tactical board. Then he pulled up the human colony's last known industrial manifest and compared it to what had just been hit. He read the manifest again. Then he looked up at the board. Every facility the Vreth had just destroyed had been flagged in human logistics records as non-operational. Decommissioned. 3 of them had decommission dates from 5 months ago. The communications towers had been listed as offline for maintenance for 6 weeks. They had not destroyed infrastructure. They had destroyed empty shells that someone had left standing so the Vreth would find them on a scan, target them, and feel like they had accomplished something. Tail set down the manifest. He thought about the 30 days of observation, the clean data, the perfect model. He thought about how easy it had been to see, to measure, to predict. He thought about the infantry unit he had flagged, the one that had changed its drill every single repetition. He finally understood what he had been looking at. He reached for his console and began writing a report directly to Warlord Shonas. He did not route it through Graf Vel. He wrote quickly, because he was starting to understand that time had already been running against them from the beginning. Shonas read the report in full. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions while Tail walked him through it, point by point, in the war room of the flagship. Graf Vel stood at the back of the room and said nothing. He had been told to attend and listen. He had not been told to speak. Tail had pulled everything. Not just the last 30 days of observation data, but 6 years of human military archive material that the Collective's intelligence service had gathered and filed and never properly connected to each other. Individual pieces. Separate reports. Each one clean and small, not alarming on its own. Together, they told a very different story. Humans have been in continuous conflict somewhere on their planet for their entire recorded history, Tail said. He pulled up a timeline that stretched back 10,000 years. Every generation, every century, without exception, they have not had a single period of complete global peace that lasted longer than 40 years. He let that sit for a moment. For context, our own collective's last major internal conflict ended 600 years ago. We have not fought a large-scale war since. Humans have fought no fewer than 4 major wars in the same period. Shonas was still watching the timeline. They developed a weapon 130 years before they reached space, Tail continued. A single weapon capable of ending all life on their planet. They built thousands of them, and then they chose not to use them. Not because they couldn't, but because they modeled the outcome and decided the result was not acceptable. They showed enough restraint, under enough pressure, over enough decades, to keep those weapons in use. He looked at the warlord. A species that can build a civilization-ending weapon and choose to leave it sitting in the ground is not a species that is incapable of restraint. It is a species that has mastered restraint as a military tool. Graf Vel made a small noise from the back of the room. Tail did not look at him. He pulled up the star map and overlaid the Vreth fleet's current position. The 30 days of observation we conducted were not 30 days of undetected surveillance, Tail said. The human fleet we watched was performing exercises. We accepted this at face value. We should have asked a different question. Why were those specific exercises being performed at that specific location, in that specific rotation, at that specific time? He highlighted the observation region on the map. The human fleet was performing exercises directly in front of our observation position. They knew we were there. The exercises were designed to be watched. The column formations we recorded, always 14 seconds apart, always the same speed, were not their standard doctrine. They were a simplified, repeatable pattern designed to give us consistent data. The room was quiet. They fed us a model, Tail said. A functional model. A model that predicted real behavior, but only the behavior they chose to show us. Their real naval doctrine has never been observed by the collective. We do not have it. He moved to the next part of the map. The ground campaign on Juris was met with defenses that were installed before our fleet arrived. The tunnels, the kill corridors, the sealed freight passages, these required weeks of construction. The evacuation of 37,000 civilians was completed in under 6 hours. That is not a response capability. That is a pre-planned operation triggered by a specific signal. He paused. The signal was our fleet dropping out of warp. He pulled up the final image. The star map, with the Vreth fleet's position centered in it, surrounded by the ring that the 8 patrol craft from Harkin had formed. We are currently inside a region of space that the humans call, in their operational documents we intercepted in the last 4 hours, a fire sack. Every primary route of withdrawal passes through a choke point. We have confirmed mines at 4 of the 7 choke points. The remaining 3 are unconfirmed, which does not mean they are clear. Shona spoke for the first time. His voice was flat. How long have they been preparing this? Our best estimate is 6 months before our observation period began, Tail said, which means they began preparing for this campaign approximately 6 months before we decided to launch it. That landed hard. Tail saw it in the room. The small stillness that comes over people when a piece of information is too large to immediately make sense of. Grathvel finally spoke from the back. They could not have known we would invade. They may have simply been running standard defense preparations. The decommissioned facilities they left standing for us to destroy, Tail said, without turning around, were decommissioned and stripped 5 months ago. The records were not hidden. They were available in public colonial logistics reports. We did not access them because we were looking at military targets, not logistics records. He finally looked at Grathvel. They left us exactly what we wanted to find, where we wanted to find it. Every data point we gathered in 30 days was a choice they made. Grathvel said nothing more. Shonas looked at the map for a long time. Then, is there a way out? Tail turned back to the display. He had spent the last 2 hours looking for an answer to that exact question. He had found something. A single corridor on the far edge of the system. No confirmed mines. No patrol contacts. Open space all the way to the warp boundary. He stared at it. There is one corridor, he said slowly. But... He stopped. But what? Shonas said. Tail looked at the open corridor and felt something cold move through him. The humans control every other route, every other approach, every choke point. He looked at the warlord. This one they left open. The room was quiet again. Why? Tail said, more to himself than to anyone present. Would they leave this open? Grathvel made the suggestion quietly, almost carefully, the way someone drops a stone into water to see how deep it goes. The civilian station, he said. Caldwell Point. 40,000 inhabitants. If we move a strike force there in broadcast terms, the humans will negotiate. Every species negotiates when lives are on the line. Shonas did not answer right away. He was still looking at the star map, at the open corridor, at the ring of human positions surrounding his fleet. Tail said nothing. He had already said everything he could. Now he watched. The warlord gave the order. A Vreth strike force of 9 vessels peeled away from the main fleet and burned hard toward Caldwell Point. They reached broadcast range in 40 minutes and transmitted the demand on an open channel. Withdraw from the fire sack formation, surrender the outer colonies, or the station would be destroyed. A response was expected within 30 minutes. Silence. Not the silence of deliberation. Not the silence of a government scrambling to find decision makers and pull them into a room. Just silence. Clean and still, like a held breath. At the 23rd minute, Admiral Riva Ogan's voice came over the open channel. Calm. Almost quiet, the way someone sounds when they are not in a hurry. Noted, she said. That was all. The channel closed. Tail watched the tactical feeds update over the next 4 minutes and felt the shape of something terrible becoming clear. He had studied human military history. He had read their wars, the old ones, the ones fought on a single planet with primitive weapons and huge losses. He had read the accounts of what happened to human forces when human civilians were threatened. He understood, academically, what that did to them. He had not truly believed it until he watched it happen in real time. Every engagement across the entire theater changed simultaneously. Not gradually, not in sequence, all at once, as though a switch had been thrown. Human units that had been holding position began moving. Human ships that had been maintaining perimeter at standard spacing accelerated to attack speed. Forces that had been conserving fuel and ammunition stopped conserving both. The careful, controlled pressure the humans had been applying for the last several hours became something different, something without the careful part. 3 Vreth cruiser groups on the far side of the system that had been trading long-range fire with human patrol ships for hours suddenly found those patrol ships had closed the distance to knife range. 2 of the cruiser groups were destroyed in under 12 minutes. The third tried to pull back and found the retreat path it had been watching all day was no longer clear. On the ground, the guerrilla contacts that had been harassing Ben Voss's forces with small, careful strikes turned into something more direct. Larger units. Moving fast. Not hiding anymore. Tail found Commander Dale Storn's unit on the tactical feed, a rapid assault group that had been held in reserve, positioned deep inside the carrier fleet. They had launched, burning hard toward Caldwell Point, not at a cautious intercept angle, but at full acceleration, accepting the fuel cost and the exposure because speed mattered more than anything else right now. They were not negotiating. They had never planned to negotiate. Tail pulled up the human response timeline. From the moment the hostage demand was broadcast to the moment Ogun said, noted, 23 minutes. He checked the timestamp on the first human unit movement. The first human units had started moving at the 21st minute. 2 minutes before Ogun spoke. 2 minutes before the official response. They had not waited for a decision. The decision had already been made. The response had already been prepared. The moment the demand was broadcast, the humans had begun executing a plan that had been sitting ready, waiting for exactly this situation. He tried to flag this for Grath Vel and found the channel dead. Grath Vel had stopped accepting communications in the last hour. Tail was not sure whether that was denial or something worse. The Vreth strike force at Caldwell Point had 9 vessels. Storn's assault group had 7, but 3 of them were heavy carriers with full ground complements, and they arrived from an angle that the Vreth strike commander had not predicted because no sane military force burned that hard at that approach angle. It cost too much fuel, it was too aggressive, it left no margin. Humans, Tail was beginning to understand, calculated margins differently than the collective did. Humans decided what they were willing to spend before the engagement started, and then spent it without hesitation when the moment came. The engagement at Caldwell Point lasted 1 hour and 58 minutes. When it ended, the station was intact. All 40,000 inhabitants, already sheltered in reinforced sections by a pre-positioned emergency team that had arrived 2 days before the invasion started, were unharmed. The 9 Vreth strike vessels were gone. Tail sat in the near-empty war room. Most of Sho'nas's staff had moved to crisis stations, and looked at the fleet status board. Read across almost every sector. 2 of the 7 choke points had been quietly sealed while the fleet was focused on Caldwell Point. A third was showing mine contact reports from the probe units Sho'nas had finally sent to check. He pulled up the open corridor again. Still open. Still clear. He kept thinking about that. Every choke point blocked. Every patrol route contested. Every move predicted and prepared for. One corridor left untouched. He thought about a species that built civilization-ending weapons and chose to leave them in the ground. He thought about the 30 days of clean, perfect, arranged data. He thought about the decommissioned facilities left standing in exactly the right place. A species that thought 6 months ahead. A species that prepared the battlefield before you decided to fight on it. A species that calculated what you would do when frightened, when trapped, when desperate. He looked at the open corridor and finally understood what it was. It was not an oversight. It was an invitation. He stood up and went to find Sho'nas. The Vreth fleet moved through the corridor in full retreat formation. It was slow. The corridor was narrow and required the fleet to compress into a long, exposed line. Every commander in the formation knew how bad that shape was, a long line of ships with no room to maneuver, moving through a region of space with no cover. Any engagement in that formation would be catastrophic, but every other route was worse. Sho'nas had made the decision after Tail's explanation, not because he trusted the open corridor, because the math on every other option was already resolved. 3 choke points confirmed mined. 2 more showing contact signs. The fire from human forces across the system was not intensifying. It had reached a steady pressure, constant and everywhere, not designed to destroy but to steer. He understood, somewhere around the 2nd hour of the retreat, that the pressure was not trying to trap them. It was keeping them in the corridor. The human ships appeared 30 minutes into the withdrawal. Not in front. Not threatening. They materialized on both sides, flanking the Vreth column at a distance of 40,000 kilometers, pacing the retreat at exactly the same speed. Not firing. Not broadcasting demands. Just there. One of Sho'nas's captains requested permission to engage the nearest human vessel, which was inside weapons range. Sho'nas denied it. He could not have explained exactly why in that moment, except that something in the calm and deliberate positioning of the human ships told him that engaging them would be the last mistake the fleet ever made. The corridor led them out of the system. The human ships stayed on both sides the entire way, 40,000 kilometers out, until the Vreth fleet crossed the outer boundary and had clear warp lanes ahead. Then the humans stopped following. The escorts simply held position at the boundary and watched. At the warp boundary, a signal came in. Not a weapon lock. A communication request. Shonas accepted it. Admiral Riva Ogun appeared on the screen. She looked the same as her voice, calm, unhurried, not particularly interested in performing anything for the camera. The corridor was intentional, she said, without preamble. We left it open. I want you to know that. Shonas looked at her. A destroyed fleet means a government back home with nothing left to lose, she said. A surviving fleet that goes home intact means a government with options. Governments with options make different decisions than governments that are cornered. She looked at him directly. We have made the mistake of cornering governments. We know what that produces. We are not interested in repeating it. She laid out the terms. Simple. The Vreth Collective withdraws from human-adjacent space. Existing colony distances are maintained. In exchange, humanity does not pursue. No punitive campaign. No reparations demand. No occupation. The war ends at the boundary line. Shonas was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in him since Tails' report in the war room. Why offer terms at all? You had us. Ogun considered this. Because we have been at war with ourselves for 10,000 years, she said. And we have learned, at great cost, what happens when you do not leave the enemy a path to stop. You create something that cannot stop. We have fought that kind of war. We do not want to fight it again, with you or anyone else. She paused. We are offering you a way to stop. That offer has a shelf life. I'd recommend using it. Shonas accepted the terms. The channel closed. He sat in the war room for a long time after. Tail was the only other person present. Grathvel had not been seen since the Caldwell Point engagement. Someone had reported him in his quarters, reviewing his own observation report on a loop. No one had gone to check on him. Did you know? Shonas said finally, not really directing the question at anyone, that they were going to offer terms. I suspected, Tail said. The open corridor was not a tactical choice. It was a message. They were communicating their intention before we had even decided to retreat. Shonas nodded slowly. He looked at the star map, now showing Vreth space on one side and human space on the other, with a clean boundary between them. Write your report, he said. Everything. Send it to every military command in the collective. Tail had already started. He worked through the night cycle, pulling together everything. The observation data, the manufactured model, the arranged exercises, the prepared colony, the empty facilities, the hostage gambit that had removed the last human restraint rather than adding to it, the open corridor, the escort. He wrote it as clearly as he could, in the plainest language he had, because he wanted there to be no room for anyone to misunderstand. At the end, after the analysis and the recommendations and the strategic assessments, he added a single paragraph that was not analysis. It was something closer to a warning, something he felt needed to be said in plain terms, not wrapped in data. He wrote, "Do not watch humanity and believe you understand them. What you observe is what they choose to show. The model you build from their behavior is the model they built for you. The war begins the moment you stop watching, and by then, the battlefield has already been prepared. They have been at war for 10,000 years. They have learned things about it that we have not. The most important thing they have learned is this: how to end a war before the other side knows it has begun." He filed the report and sent it. Then he closed his console, leaned back, and sat in the quiet for a while. Somewhere on the other side of the boundary, on the carrier Dawn line, Commander Dale Storn stood at a viewport and watched the Vreth fleet disappear into warp. Lieutenant Cora Brandt stood beside him. She waited until the last Vreth ship was gone and then said, "Do you think it holds the agreement?" He thought about it honestly. For a while. Long enough. He looked at the space where the Vreth fleet had been. They'll think about it for years. What they saw? What they didn't see. That's the part that stays with them. Brandt looked at the stars. 6 months of prep for 30 days of bait. 10,000 years of practice, Dale said, for 6 months of prep. He turned away from the viewport. Get some rest. There's always another one.